Oxygen Advantage. I'd like to introduce you to Andre Paul. So Andre is an Oxygen Advantage Advanced Instructor. His background is golf and BJJ. So Andre, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me, Patrick. And I just have a lot of reverence for the work that you've done. And you'd even share your story about how you've been able to heal your asthma, anxiety. You mentioned like 25 years of mouth breathing, which is a lot. And certainly a lot can transform in a short amount of time. So that's my journey, especially with jiu-jitsu, let's say. Um, so I'm a competitive jiu-jitsu player. Started out in golf. That was my first passion, first love, why I moved down to Florida 5 years ago. And I was actually doing Wim Hof method for 3 years. So every day I'm very dedicated. I'll wake up and I will do, let's say at the time I was doing Wim Hof for 20 minutes a day. I got up to the point that I could hold my breath for 10 minutes, right? I was very, very extreme about it. And I thought this was giving me more oxygen, right? So my paradigm at the time was if I take in more air, bigger, fuller breaths, I'm getting more oxygen. But it turns out I was continuing to progress in competitions, facing higher levels, got promoted to blue belt. And then I was losing to people that frankly weren't more skillful athletes than me, not particularly in better shape, because I was so anxious and I was so gassed out in competition. I would do Wim Hof right before I competed, and something just seemed off. So I had the book, The Breathing Cure. I came across a podcast that you were on, and the podcast almost gave me some resistance because I was like, what is this guy talking about? I'm breathing lighter. I'm going to get more air. Like, it all seems very contradictory to what I've been taught. So I explored the method. I started to read the book. Someone in my jiu-jitsu school at the same time taught me about Brian Mirabella's work. So then I took his program, Recode Your Breath. And I think he's on the call actually right now. So a lot of reverence for Brian too. And he's a master instructor, but truly a master of teaching people how to create safety in their nervous systems. And that was a big paradigm shift for me. And other teachers have impressed that upon me as well. But it's using the breath to create safety and come back to a state of autonomic regulation and a foundation of parasympathetic health, as opposed to being in fight or flight, doing more and getting more all the time, which is a very, aggressive, almost, yeah, very ego-driven paradigm that I was in, right? So I started playing around with that. And actually, the first benefit that I had was within 3 weeks of doing Brian's program, I had a 30% improvement in HRV, 30% boost in HRV. So I was sleeping better. This is really just from doing simulation of altitude training, some basic exercises, improving my bolt score, which at the time was about 20 to 25 seconds, let's say for reference. And today it's anywhere from 40s to 50s. And still working to improve it, but certainly where this modality has helped me the most is that ability to recover, right? And I would impress upon any athlete, any fitness trainer, don't expect to just do breathing exercises and become a world champion, right? If you want to be great at jujitsu, you have to show up to the mats and do jujitsu. Same for hockey, same for golf, whatever it is. The skill is the primary thing. But that said, I have a remarkable ability to recover now, and I recently just went into Park City, Utah. I was visiting a friend there and skied for the first time. I was at altitude, say 9,000 feet, and it was effortless for me to adapt. And there were other people in my group there, group of friends hanging out who are not used to the altitude, not doing simulation of altitude exercises, and they had sickness. And it was totally fine. And I learned how to ski in a day or two, and then went to Hawaii a week later, and I was swimming a mile in the ocean. So endurance has become really, really effortless for me. And just to share a bit about jujitsu again, like it's one of the most stressful sports you can do. Literally, a human being is trying to strangle you in front of a crowd of people with a very complicated rule set and a lot of things for the mind to pay attention to. And it requires strength and mobility, really every aspect of fitness. But what I would share is that breath is the foundation of all of that. If you want to have good mobility, you're not going to have good mobility if you don't have functional breathing. If you want to be strong, you're not going to be strong if you're unable to properly brace through your core, right? The foundation of functional movement, as you said, is spinal stability, core strength. And if you want to think clearly, if your nervous system and the entire circular vasculatory system is right just constricting all the time, then there's no free flow of information. You can't think clearly. So that's what I was able to improve. And I went from, constantly losing in the first round of these tournaments to suddenly within a few months, actually, it was pretty quickly. I was taking down the number one guy in the world in my tournament bracket. So there was a particular tournament actually on my birthday where I did a gi tournament. So you compete in a kimono, right? And the kimono weighs like 4.6 pounds, by the way. That's another factor. You have to make weight for these jujitsu tournaments. And I used to hate that. But just by doing these breathing methods, it's been effortless to cut weight because I can, one, regulate my nervous system, but two, regulate my pH, and that regulates my appetite. So I believe anyway. You can correct me on the science there. But there was one tournament where I was at risk of not making weight just before a bracket. And this is the second bracket in the day. Imagine there's a kimono tournament, you wear a gi. Later on, there's just the no gi tournament. So only wearing a rash guard, like a compression shirt. And in that tournament, you have to weigh 3 pounds less than the first tournament. So I show up and I'm 2 pounds overweight. And I've got 20 minutes before my match. And I'm like, well, we're here. I'm not quitting. So what I did was I went outside, went into my car in Florida, and I held my breath for 2 minutes because I know that improving oxygen delivery can activate heat in the body. So that made me sweat. I put on layers, ran some laps around the building while nasal breathing, came back in. I was a pound underweight. And then, so I lost 3 pounds in 20 minutes just sweating because I'm used to hot yoga and that kind of extreme activity. And then I went in and I beat the number one guy in the world. I faced him again that day. He beat me in the gi tournament. And then I beat him in the no-gi tournament with a very risky technique called a flying Kimura, and really just kind of caught him by surprise. But I suspect that was because I was in a state of regulating my nervous system, and he had 5, 6 matches that day after winning the first gi bracket. So if he's hyperventilating the whole time, breathing through his mouth, as I noticed he was, his reaction time is going to slow down. So I took advantage of that, and then I was able to win.
Good stuff. Amazing. Well done. Super. There's a couple of points just from Andre there. Whenever you're competing, always watch the breathing of your opponent.
Mm.
And don't give your breath away because they're also watching you, but they may not overtly know it, but they're paying attention to it. You intuitively pick up on whether a person is gassed out or not. So there is a way to change breathing practices that you're less likely to gas out, because you always have to bear this in mind. How you breathe during tournament is going to be influenced by your breathing outside of the tournament. If you have poor breathing habits in your normal everyday life, if you're sleeping with your mouth open, as 50% of adults do, waking up with a dry mouth in the morning, if your breathing is a bit faster, a bit harder, a bit upper chest, that breathing is not going to automatically correct itself during competition. So this is where your everyday breathing influences your breathing during sleep and influences your breathing during competition. So I'll go through a couple more slides and then we'll go through some practice. And as I said, I want to go through a little bit of functional breathing practice